to support them through this next chapter, and we encourage all members of this Council to do the same. Thank you. And I now resume my function as President of the Council, and I will give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Kang In-sun, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank Special Envoy Patterson, OCHA USG Tom Fletcher, and Ms. Saif, co-founder of the Syrian Women's Political Movement, for their timely briefings and their dedicated efforts. It is a great honor to participate in today's briefing as we witness Syria's transition. We acknowledge the complexity of this transformation and recognize the growing role of the caretaker authorities in the process. It is essential that the international community continues to support Syria's transition toward a united, independent, inclusive state. In this regard, I would like to highlight the following 3 points. First, Syria must now focus on a political transition rooted in inclusivity more than ever. The establishment of a transitional government should prioritize political reconciliation among all ethnic and religious communities. In light of this, we take note of the agreement to integrate the Syrian Democratic Forces into national institutions and the signing of a constitutional declaration, both significant steps in its political transition. We underscore the importance of reintegrating armed factions in an inclusive manner, and we urge all parties to constructively contribute to this process. And we hope the constitutional declaration can serve as a foundation for a credible, inclusive, and non-sectarian governance in line with the UNSC Resolution 2254. Second, we express deep concern about hostilities within Syria, including recent armed conflicts in Syria's coastal regions. We would also like to express concern over Israeli military operations in Syria, including today's airstrikes in Daraa. We emphasize utmost importance of protecting civilians and stress that further violence should not occur. We acknowledge the efforts of the caretaker authorities to protect all Syrians and their efforts to establish a fact-finding committee to ensure accountability for these tragic events. This step is crucial for fostering national unity and for demonstrating commitment to transitional justice based on the rule of law. Third, we urge stronger international commitment to humanitarian aid and economic recovery in Syria to overcome the pain and destruction of 14 years of conflict. After years of conflict, recent developments have brought hope to Syrian refugees and displaced persons to return to their homes. But as the situation remains uncertain, many of them still face challenges such as limited access to jobs and basic services. In this regard, we endorse the call for enhanced international support as reaffirmed in the Brussels last week, where we reiterated our commitment to standing with Syria. The Republic of Korea has provided nearly $150 million in humanitarian assistance to Syria and its neighboring countries over the past decade. We will continue to provide assistance to the people of Syria, partnering with international organizations. As Korea has pledged, 2,400 tons of Korean rice will be delivered to assist food insecure populations in Syria in collaboration with the World Food Programme. Furthermore, we share the view that the suffering from the sanctions targeting the former Assad regime continue to hinder the efforts of the Syrian people to establish a stable and peaceful society. In this light, we take a positive note on a series of recent developments on suspension of sanctions within international community as part of efforts to support Syria's swift economic recovery, reconstruction, and stabilization. Mr. President, historic momentum and subsequent developments compel us to reaffirm the UN's commitment to facilitating a Syrian-led political process, a crucial step toward lasting peace and prosperity for all Syrians. The Republic of Korea remains steadfast in its solidarity with the Syrian people in pursuit of a long-awaited goal, as their aspirations for stability, peace, and a brighter future continue to inspire us all. I thank you.
I thank Excellency Ms. Kang for her statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Спасибо, господин председатель.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Признательный
We would
спецпосланнику
like to thank the
генсекретаря
Special
ООН по
Envoy
Сирии
of the
Гейру
Secretary General
Петерсону
for
и
Syria, Mr.
заместителю
Geir
генсекретаря
Peterson,
ООН по
and
гуманитарным
Under
вопросам
Secretary
Тому
General for
Флетчеру
Humanitarian Affairs, Mr.
за
Tom Fletcher.
развернутые
We
доклады о
thank them for
ситуации в
their
Сирийской Арабской
detailed
Республике.
briefings on the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic.
Выслушали также
We
информацию,
also
предоставленную
listened to the
Jumana Saif.
information which was provided by Jumana Saif.
За прошедшее с декабря прошлого года время
Since
можно
time elapsed since
констатировать,
December last, we
что
have been
смена
able to
власти Сирийской
see
Арабской
that
Республики,
the
к сожалению,
change
не избавила народ
of
этой
power
страны
in the Syrian
от
Arab Republic
многочисленных
unfortunately did not
гуманитарных,
rid the people of this
социально-экономических
country
проблем и
from
внешних
numerous
угроз,
humanitarian
которые не
socio-economic
только
problems and
остаются
external
актуальными, но
threats.
и множатся.
They remain relevant and they're even growing.
От успешного преодоления
Successful
стоящих перед страной
tackling the
вызовов
challenges the
во
country is
многом зависит
facing
будущее этой арабской
will determine
республики.
to a large degree what the
потому
future of
сирийцам
this Arab
жизненно
Republic will
необходима
be, and therefore
всесторонняя
the
и
Syrians are of
деполитизированная
vital need
поддержка со
of a
стороны международного
multilateral and
сообщества.
depoliticized support from the international community.
Ситуация в
The
Сирии
situation
сегодня
in Syria
характеризуется
today is
продолжающимся
characterized
экономическим
by
упадком
continued
и
economic
частыми
decline
всплесками
and
насилия.
frequent outbreaks of violence.
Данные по количеству
Data
нуждающихся в
about
помощи,
the number
положению
of
дел в
people
области
in
продовольственной
need, the
безопасности
situation
и
when it comes to
медицинского
food
обслуживания
security and healthcare
свидетельствует о том,
show
что поставить
that
страну на
putting
рельсы
the country
устойчивого
back
развития
on the
можно
path
только
towards
посредством
sustainable
повсеместного
development
прекращения
is
военных
only
действий
possible if there is an end
и
to hostilities
осуществления
everywhere
системных преобразований.
and if there is a reform
Иных альтернатив нет.
undertaken. There is
Сирийский
no
народ
alternative to
должен
that.
наконец получить
Syrian
право на
people
достойную
should
жизнь в мире и
finally
благополучии.
receive the right for decent peace, life and well-being.
Господин председатель,
Mr. President,
крайне тревожным развитием
a
событий
very
стали
worrying
продолжающиеся боестолкновения в
development for us
Алеппо
was the
и на
continued clashes
северо-востоке
in
страны,
Aleppo and the northeast of
уносящие
the
жизни
country.
людей
They
и
have taken lives
разрушающие
of
гражданскую
people and
инфраструктуру.
destroyed civilian infrastructure.
Однако настоящим
But what
шоком
was
для
a
всех
real
нас
shock
явилась
for
недавняя
all of
вспышка
us was
насилия
a
в
recent
прибрежных районах
outbreak
Латакии и
of
Тартуса,
violence in the coastal areas of
где
Latakia
погибли и
and
пострадали
Tartus, where
сотни,
hundreds,
если не
if not
тысячи гражданских
thousands
лиц из
of
числа алавитов,
civilians
христиан и
died,
других
Alawites,
этнических и
Christians,
религиозных
and other
меньшинств.
ethnic and religious minority
Она
representatives.
также спровоцировала
This
новые вынужденные
provoked
перемещения
a
мирных жителей, в том
new
числе за пределы
displacement
Сирии.
of civilian people who were compelled to leave, sometimes outside of
В
Syria.
соцсетях опубликовано множество
Social
шокирующих
networks
материалов,
have a great deal of
свидетельствующих о
shocking
совершенных
information
преступлениях в отношении
showing the
гражданских
crimes
лиц.
committed against civilians.
Оставить все это
And
без
of
внимания
course,
Совет
the
Безопасности
Security
ООН,
Council
разумеется, не может.
cannot ignore all of this.
В этой связи
In this
признательны
regard,
всем членам
we are
Совета
grateful
за
to all
оперативное
members of the
согласование
Council for
принятого по нашей совместной с
expeditiously
американскими партнерами
agreeing
инициативе,
a document
заявление
which was
председателя Совета
undertaken on our
Безопасности,
joint
в
initiatives
котором
with the
решительно
American
осуждается
colleagues,
массовое
the
убийство в Латаке и
presidential
Тартусе
statement
и акцентируется
which
необходимость
condemns
скорейшего
mass killing in
проведения
Latakia and
прозрачного,
Tartus and emphasizes
независимого,
the need for a
беспристрастного и
swift,
всеобъемлющего
transparent, independent,
расследования
impartial,
в соответствии
and
с международными
comprehensive
стандартами
investigation in line
для
with international
привлечения всех
standards
виновных к
so as to
ответственности.
hold all perpetrators accountable.
В этом
In
контексте
this
хотели бы
context, I
отметить,
would like
что
to
президент России
note that the
Владимир Путин
President of Russia,
направил
Vladimir
послание
Putin,
главе
sent a
сирийского
letter to the
государства
head of
Ахмеду
the
Шара,
Syrian
в котором
state,
поддержал
Ahmed
усилия по
Shah,
скорейшей
and in this letter
стабилизации
he
обстановки
supported
в
the
стране в
efforts to
интересах
stabilize the
обеспечения ее
situation as quickly as
суверенитета,
possible
независимости,
to ensure its
единства и
sovereignty,
территориальной
independence,
целостности.
unity, and territorial
Надеемся,
integrity.
что
And we hope
предпринимаемые
that
Дамаском
the
меры,
measures undertaken
включая
by
создание
Damascus,
комиссии по установлению
including
фактов и
establishing a
расследованию событий в
fact-finding and
прибрежных районах,
investigative commission
а также учреждение
for
Высшего
the coastal
комитета по
areas,
защите
and also
гражданского мира
establishing a high committee
будут
for for Civil
способствовать
Peace will
стабилизации
help
ситуации в регионе.
stabilize the situation in the region.
Это безусловный
Of course,
приоритет для
this is
строительства
a
прочного
priority in
фундамента
order to
новой
build a
Сирии,
firm
где будут
foundation for the new
гарантированы
Syria,
права
the kind
всех
of Syria where
этноконфессиональных
the rights
меньшинств.
of all ethnic and religious minorities will
Рассчитываем
be
на получение от
guaranteed.
сирийских
And
властей
we count on
соответствующей информации,
receiving the
а
information
также
about
на их
that from the
плотное
Syrian
взаимодействие
authorities
со
and also count
спецпосланником в
on their
контексте
close
положений и
cooperation
заявлений
with the
председателя
envoy
Совета
in the context
Безопасности.
of the provisions we have in the presidential statement.
Гуманитарная
The
обстановка
humanitarian
пострадавших от
situation
столкновений в
in the
прибрежных районах,
coastal
особенно в
areas
сельской местности,
impacted,
остается
especially in the
крайне
rural
тяжелой.
areas, remains
По
very, very
данным
difficult.
ЮНИСЕФ,
According to
фиксируется
UNICEF,
острая
there is
нехватка
an acute
продовольствия,
shortage of
ограничен
food
доступ
there.
к жизненно
There's
важным
limited
услугам.
access to vital
Посещаемость
services.
школ сохраняется на
School
низком уровне.
attendance remains at a very low level.
Многие мирные
And
граждане
many
вынуждены были
civilians
бежать в
had to
поисках
flee in
безопасности.
search of personal
Необходимо
safety.
не только не допустить
What we need to
дальнейшего
make
разрастания
sure is
кризиса,
not
но
just that
и избежать
the crisis
какого-либо
doesn't spread
проявления
further,
гонений
but
на
we also have to
представителей
make sure that there is no
этноконфессиональных меньшинств,
persecution of
исконно
representatives
проживающих на
of
этих
ethnic
территориях.
and religious minorities who have been living on those lands.
В свете последних событий в
In the
Латаке
light
и
of the recent
Тартусе
events in Lataka
считаем
and
оправданным
Tartus,
активизировать
we think it would
работу
make
ООН
sense to enhance
по
the
оказанию
UN
помощи
work to extend
жителям
assistance
прибрежных
to the
районов.
people living in the
Тем
coastal
более, что,
regions,
насколько мы понимаем,
especially since,
особых
as far as
проблем
we
с
understand,
доступом
there aren't
возникнуть не
major
должно.
issues, there
И
shouldn't be
Дамаск
major issues
по-прежнему
with
проявляет
humanitarian
конструктивный
assistance
подход к
access.
взаимодействию с
Damascus has been
гуманитарщиками.
showing a constructive approach when it
В
comes
этих
to
условиях, возможно,
interacting with
стоило бы подумать о
humanitarians.
наращивании
Given
присутствия
this, we should
ОПГВ
perhaps be
в
thinking
Латаке и
about
Тартусе,
growing the OCHA
включая
presence in
открытие
Lataka
там
and Tartus,
дополнительного отделения
including
управления
possibly an opening up
с
an
учетом
additional
начатого
OCHA
процесса
sub-office there.
реформирования
Take into
архитектуры
account that the
гуманитарного
process of
реагирования в Сирийской
humanitarian
Арабской Республике.
architecture reform in the Syrian Arab Republic has been
Такие меры
launched.
позволили бы держать
Such
происходящее на
measures
контроле,
would
на
help
регулярной
keep the situation
основе
under
оценивать
control and
потребности
regularly
населения и
assess the needs
незамедлительно
of the
реагировать, в
people
том
and
числе в
react to
случае
them
возможного
immediately,
обострения
including
ситуации.
in case the situation worsens.
Господин председатель,
Mr. President,
с тревогой следили и
we
за недавними
were
столкновениями на
following with
ливано-сирийском
concern the recent
приграничье,
clashes on
в
the
ходе
border between
которых
Lebanon and
была
Syria. In the
задействована
course of
артиллерия
those
и
clashes,
регулярные
artillery was
армейские
used and
формирования с
regular
обеих
army
сторон.
units on both sides.
Приветствуем достижение
We
решения
welcome
о
the decision to
прекращении
have a
огня
ceasefire,
по итогам
which
телефонного
came
разговора
out
министров
after
обороны
a
Ливана и
phone
Сирии.
call between the ministries of defense of Lebanon and
Призываем
Syria.
Дамаск и
And we
Бейрут
call upon
предпринять все
Damascus and
необходимые
Beirut to
шаги для
undertake all of the
недопущения
steps
дальнейших
necessary to
инцидентов на
prevent
границе
any
и
further
купирования
incidents on
рисков
the
их
border and to
разрастания
cut the
до
risks of them
неконтролируемых
growing
масштабов.
uncontrollably.
Не меньшую деструктивную роль
And no less
играют и
destructive role is
непрекращающиеся
also
авианалеты
played by
Израиля
continued
по территории
Israeli
Сирийской Арабской
airstrikes against the
Республики
territory
и
of
ее
Syria and Arab Republic
продолжающаяся
and
оккупация
Israel's continued
Западным Иерусалимом.
occupation of
Решительно
territory
осуждаем
by
удары
West
Цахал,
Jerusalem. We
по итогам
condemn the strikes
которых
by
только за
IDF as a
последние дни
result
на юге
of
провинции Хомс убиты и
which
ранено более 20
more than
человек.
20 people were killed and wounded
Призываем Западный
in
Иерусалим
the south
вернуться
of Homs.
к
And we
соблюдению
call
своих
on West
обязательств по
Jerusalem
соглашению о
to
разъединении
return to upholding their
1974 года
obligations under the 1974
и вывести
disengagement of
подразделения из
forces
буферной
agreements
зоны
and
и
to
других
withdraw the
занятых
units from
с
the
декабря
buffer area
2023
and other
года
areas
сирийских
taken since
территорий.
December 2023 in Syria.
Новое сирийское
The
руководство
new
неоднократно
Syrian
заявляло о
leadership has
готовности к
stated many
выстраиванию
times that
мирных
they are
отношений со
ready
всеми
to build
соседями без
peaceful
исключения.
relations with all of its neighbors without
Израиль же своими
exception.
действиями
But Israel, through
перечеркивает
its
такой
action,
настрой
has put
и
paid to
усиливает
that and is
голоса радикально
strengthening
настроенных
those
сил внутри
voices
Сирии.
which are radical
Такой
inside Syria.
подход в долгосрочной
Such an
перспективе
approach
не
in
будет
the
способствовать
long
укреплению
term is
безопасности
not going
Израиля.
to help strengthen Israeli security.
Сохраняется в стране
There
и
is also
террористическая
a
угроза.
terrorist threat which
Призываем
remains in the
Дамаск
country,
уделить
and
ей
we call on
повышенное
Damascus to
внимание, не
pay
дать
special
ИГИЛ
attention
и
to it and
другим
make sure that
терроргруппировкам
ISIL and other
укрепиться на сирийской
terror
земле.
groups do not take root in Syria.
Особое
We are
беспокойство
particularly
вызывает проблемы
concerned by the
иностранных
issue of
террористов-боевиков,
foreign terrorist fighters who
засветившихся в том
have
числе и в ходе
turned up
столкновений
there,
на западе
including in the
страны,
clashes
в отношении
in the
которых
west of the
должны быть
country,
немедленно
and
предприняты решительные
decisive
меры.
measures against them should be undertaken immediately.
Отмечаем
We
подписание
note
10
that on
марта
the
рамочного
10th of
соглашения
March
в
there was a
Дамаске
framework agreement
между
signed in
Ахмедом Шара и
Damascus between
командующим
Ahmed
сирийскими
Shara and
демократическими силами
the
Мазлумом
commander
Абди,
of the SDF,
предусматривающее
Mazloum Abdi.
возвращение за
It
Ефрати под
provides for the
управление
return
центральных
of the
властей и интеграцию
trans-Euphrates
курдских
under
военизированных
central
формирований
forces and
в
the
государственный
integration
силовой блок.
of Kurdish militarized units under
Добросовестная
government
реализация
into
положений этих
government forces.
договоренностей будет
Good faith
способствовать укреплению
implementation
единства
of these
Сирии и
agreements
доверию
will help
других
strengthen the
этнорелигиозных
unities
меньшинств
of
Дамаска,
Syria and the threat
рассчитывающих на
and
гарантии
the
защиты
trust
и
by other
соблюдения
ethnic
собственных
religious
прав в рамках
minorities to
единого сирийского
Damascus
государства.
as they hope that their rights
В этой
will be
связи вновь
protected
подтверждаем, что
within the
путь к
new
устойчивой
Syrian state.
нормализации
We
ситуации
say
в
here
Сирии
once
лежит
again that the
исключительно через
road to
инклюзивный
sustainable
межсирийский
normalization
диалог,
in Syria lies
направленный
through
на
inclusive
достижение
inter-Syrian
национального
dialogue
согласия и
aimed
продвижение
at
комплексного
national
политорегулирования
agreement,
в
reconciliation, and
соответствии с
advancing
базовыми принципами,
comprehensive political
заложенными в
settlement in
резолюции
line with the
Совета
basic
Безопасности
principles we have in Security
2254.
Council Resolution
Этот
2254.
процесс должен
This
осуществляться
process should
посредством
be
принятия
implemented
продуманных,
through
сбалансированных и подлинно инклюзивных
making well-considered, balanced, and genuinely inclusive decisions, and they need to be met by moves on the part of the international community aimed at improving the economic situation in the country and heightening the quality of life of ordinary Syrians. We are convinced that the UN has to play a key role in accompanying a Syrian-owned and led political process. And we would like to express our full support to the efforts in this regard undertaken by the Special Envoy Geir Pedersen. Mr. President, in his message to Ahmed Shara, President of Russia Vladimir Putin reaffirmed our readiness to develop practical interaction with Damascus on all of the issues we have on our bilateral agenda so as to strengthen the traditionally friendly relations between our countries. And we hope that the Syrian people will be able to finally overcome all of the challenges the country is facing. Russia is extremely interested in seeing this done. I thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Federation of Russian Federation, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Special Envoy Geir Pedersen and Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher, for your briefings. We appreciate your ongoing efforts, particularly in the wake of the sectarian violence that swept over coastal regions in western Syria earlier this month. And thank you, Ms. Jumana Saif, for your briefing, including about your own story and about the indispensable role of women in Syria's political transition. On March 14th, this Council adopted a presidential statement that calls on the interim authorities to hold accountable the perpetrators of the mass killings in western Syria and enact further measures to prevent its recurrence. We expect the interim authorities to act on the Council's clear message. All parties in Syria must protect civilians from violence, regardless of ethnicity, religion, or political ideology. We look forward to the report early next month from the Independent Investigative Committee to examine all atrocities committed, with particular attention to reports of extrajudicial killings. It will also be important to see genuine efforts at reconciliation with the Alawite community from the Coastal Committee tasked with assisting the interim authorities' engagement. Interim authorities must also embark on a political process that includes Kurdish, Druze, Alawite, and Christian communities, something they have not meaningfully done to date. Only a truly representative process will reassure Syrians that they have a place in Syria's future. The United States reaffirms its support for a political transition that demonstrates credible, non-sectarian governance as the best path to avoid further conflict. We have concerns that the draft constitution framework is not headed in the right direction, and we are watching closely who is selected for cabinet positions. While we welcome the March 10th agreement with the Syrian Democratic Forces to integrate the Northeast into a unified Syria, real and meaningful progress will be defined by the details of implementation. The agreement is a modest first step in the pursuit of a stable and independent Syria. To be meaningful, this agreement must be finalized with details that include a unified state security structure that ensures Syria does not pose an external threat to neighboring states and is capable of defeating Syrian-based ISIS or other violent extremist groups, including Iranian-backed militias. Syria's security framework must include detailed plans to ensure, 1, that ISIS fighters remain in detention, and 2, that there is continued control of the large population of foreign ISIS terrorists currently contained by the Syrian Democratic Forces. We will see an insurgence of ISIS if this population of approximately 8,200 fighters escapes or is let free. On El Hol and Al Roj, we call on all nations that have citizens inside these camps to repatriate their nationals. It is time to depopulate the camps, which serve as incubators of terrorism, to prevent further radicalization of another generation of ISIS. Mr. President, actions meant to be significant signposts in Syria's ongoing transition have fallen short of expectations. We must remain clear-eyed about our outstanding challenges that are faced. Everyone, including Syria's interim authorities, knows much more can and needs to be done. For one, there must be expansive representation of Syrian voices on a new committee formed to draft the permanent constitution. Unless a representative committee is formed, Syria will fail and remain in the sectarian shadow of the Assad regime, increasing the likelihood of a new civil war. Foreign fighters have no role in Syria's military or governing institutions. This month's clashes in the coastal region, in which foreign fighters reportedly committed atrocities, were stark reminders of the seriousness of this threat. All foreign fighters need to be removed from their posts immediately, and military units comprised of foreign fighters must be disbanded. We condemn and are watching closely recent attempts by Hezbollah and their Iranian backers to create instability on the Lebanese-Syrian border. We call on the Syrian interim authorities and the government of Lebanon to cooperate and deconflict their military operations so that Iran-backed terrorists cannot regain a foothold in Syria. Finally, Mr. President, we encourage Syria's interim authorities to further engage with international organizations seeking to support the country's transition. In that regard, we note recent statements by the UN Secretary General and Special Envoy Pedersen expressing readiness to support a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political transition. We also welcome the recent engagement between the interim authorities and the OPCW. Technical teams must arrive soon to begin the work of identifying and destroying the Assad regime's chemical weapons program. Colleagues, Syria has arrived at a pivotal moment just 3 months since the fall of Assad. Recent events have underscored Syria's fragility and increased our concerns that interim leaders may not have moved beyond their jihadi pasts. We have seen the resilience of its people who endured 14 years of civil conflict and over 50 years of a regime's brutal rule. Advancing accountability and ensuring a representative governance is key to an enduring peace and prosperity in Syria. In our capacity as Council members, we must speak with one voice in the coming days and months as Syrians seek to reunify their country and live in peace with their neighbors. The United States seeks peace and security in the region, a stable Syria that is free from external influence, respects the rights of all Syrians, and prohibits terrorists from using Syria as a platform. The United States urges this Council to help Syria realize these common objectives. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States, and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr.
Merci,
President.
à Monsieur l'envoyé spécial
Thank
et
you
Monsieur
to
le
the Special
secrétaire
Envoy
aux Affaires
and the
humanitaires,
Undersecretary
Monsieur
General
Peterson
for
et
Humanitarian
Fletcher,
Affairs,
pour vos
Mrs. Pedersen and
interventions
Fletcher, for your
particulièrement denses, ainsi
briefings
qu'à
that were
vous, Madame
particularly
Saif, pour votre
comprehensive, and Madam Saif,
éclairant,
thank
et
you for
aussi pour
your
des années de résistance
testimony
à
and for
l'oppression.
the years of
En
resisting
décembre
oppression.
2024, après
In
des
December
décennies de répression
2024,
et des années
after
de lutte
years
du
of
peuple syrien contre la
fighting the
dictature et la violence,
dictatorship,
le régime Assad est
the
tombé.
Assad regime
La
is no
phase de
more.
transition qui s'est
The
ouverte
transitional
suscite de
phase that
nombreux
opened
espoirs,
up has
mais
given
aussi
rise
des
to a number of
inquiétudes.
hopes, but also
La communauté
concerns.
internationale
The
doit se tenir
international
aux côtés du
community
peuple
must stand
syrien.
alongside
C'est
the
la
Syrian
voie que la
people.
France
This
a
is the
choisie.
path that France
4
has chosen.
priorités à cet
4
égard.
priorities in
Tout
this
d'abord,
regard.
mettre un
First of
terme à la
all, put an end to
violence. Les
violence.
massacres survenus au début de
The
ce mois dans la
massacres that
région
we saw
côtière
in
montrent
the
que le
coastal
risque
region
d'une
recently show that
fragmentation
the
de la
risk of
Syrie est
fragmentation
une
of Syria
réalité.
is a reality.
La France a condamné ces
France has
massacres.
condemned
Il est
these
désormais
events, and
nécessaire
it's
que les
now necessary
responsables
that
de
those
violence,
responsible
quel
for
que
the
soit leur
violence,
camp,
whatever camp
soient
they are
traduits
in,
en
be brought
justice.
to justice.
Cette exigence fait
This
écho aux attentes
demand
d'une
echoes the
justice transitionnelle qui
expectations
tienne pour responsables
for
ceux qui ont
transitional
commis des
justice
crimes sous le régime Assad, mais aussi depuis sa chute.
bring
Les
to
Nations Unies
justice
ont
of those
proposé
that
leur
have committed
appui.
crimes
Je
under
salue
Assad
la
and
présence dans le
since.
public de
And
Madame
I
Quintana.
welcome the presence
Au
of
nord-est,
Madam Kinzela.
l'accord signé
In
entre
the
les
northeast,
autorités
the
intérimaires à
agreement
Damas
signed
et les
between
forces
the interim
démocratiques
authorities in
syriennes
Damascus
est
and
une
the
première
Syrian
étape
Democratic
en vue
Reforces
d'une
is a
solution
first step
négociée pour
towards
l'unification
a
de la Syrie
negotiated
et la
solution
garantie
for
des droits et des
Syria
intérêts des
and
Kurdes
to
de Syrie.
guarantee the rights
La
of the
transition en Syrie
Kurds.
intervient
The
dans un
transition in
contexte où le
Syria is
terrorisme
taking
reste puissant.
place at a
Il
time
est
when
primordial que
terrorism
les autorités à Damas
remains in the
poursuivent
region,
la lutte
it's
contre cette
essential that
menace,
Damascus
en
fight this
particulier
threat,
contre
particularly
Daesh, et règle la
Daesh,
question des combattants étrangers
and address
terroristes.
the issue of foreign
De même,
terrorist
le
fighters.
démantèlement du programme
Also,
d'armes
the
chimiques et la
dismantling of the
coopération
chemical
avec
weapons program
l'OISC
and the
sont des attentes
cooperation with
fortes
the
de la
IAEA
communauté
are
internationale.
important
Nous
expectations
saluons
of the
la
international
récente et
community,
première
and we
mission
welcome
en
the
Syrie de
first
l'OIS.
mission of the
Deuxièmement,
IAEA to
liberté
Syria.
pour le peuple
Then
syrien.
freedom for the
La
Syrian
transition passe
people.
par le
The
respect des
transition
aspirations des
must
Syriens.
respect the
La feuille de
aspirations of
route
the
à laquelle
Syrian
les
people.
autorités
The
de
roadmap
Damas
that
sont
the
engagées
Damascus
est
authorities
claire.
have committed to
Une
is
transition
clear.
politique
A
pacifique et
peaceful,
représentative
representative
de
political
toutes les composantes
transition
du
of all
peuple
components
syrien
of
dans
Syrian,
l'esprit des
the
principes de
Syrian
la
people,
résolution
respecting
2254.
Resolution
La France soutient les efforts de Geir
2254.
Petersen
France
pour appuyer ce
supports the efforts of Geir
processus.
Pedersen
Les
to
Nations Unies ont
support
un
this
rôle important
process.
à
The
jouer
United
pour
Nations
accompagner
has
la
an
transition
important role to
politique en
play
cours.
in
Nous
assisting the
encourageons les
political
autorités
transition underway,
syriennes
and we
à
encourage the
construire
Syrian
avec l'ONU
authorities,
une
together
relation
with
de
the UN, to
confiance
build
qui
a trust,
concrétisera
a
l'appui de
relationship
la
of
communauté
trust,
à la
together
Syrie.
with the support of the
Lors de la
international
conférence de
community.
Paris sur la
At the
Syrie le
Paris
13
conference
février
on Syria
dernier,
on the 13th
les
of
autorités de
February,
transition ont souscrit
the
à une
transitional
déclaration
authorities
contenant
signed
des
up
engagements
to
précis.
a declaration
Depuis
with
lors, de
specific
premiers résultats ont
commitments.
été obtenus.
The first results
Première
have been
session du
seen,
dialogue
the first
national
holding of a national
annonce une
dialogue and the
déclaration
announcement of
constitutionnelle
a provisional
provisoire. Nous
constitutional
appelons à ce que ce
declaration,
dialogue national
and
se
we call for
poursuive
this dialogue
et
to
implique
continue
l'ensemble des composantes
and
de la
involve all
société
components
syrienne,
of Syrian
sans
society
exception.
without
Nous appelons à
exception,
la formation d'un
and we call
gouvernement
for the formation of
représentatif,
a representative
reconnu comme
government
légitime par
recognized as
l'ensemble des
legitimate
Syriens.
by all Syrians.
L'égale participation des femmes
The
syriennes aux
participation of
décisions est
Syrian women
indispensable,
in
de même
decision
que le
making is also
respect et la
indispensable,
prise
as
en
well
compte
as
de toutes celles et ceux qui
taking into
appartiennent à des
account the
minorités
interests of all
chrétiennes,
the
kurdes,
minorities,
chiites,
Christian,
alaouites,
Shiite,
druzes,
Alawite,
ces minorités qui
Kurdish,
font une richesse de
all
la Syrie
these
depuis des siècles.
minorities
Troisièmement,
represent the
soutien
richness of
humanitaire et
Syria.
redressement
Then
économique.
support the political
Chacun sait que les
process and the
populations
economic
endurent des
recovery.
privations très graves, que
Everyone knows
l'économie
that
est en
suffering
ruine,
is great,
que
the
les
economy
infrastructures
is
sont
in
dévastées.
ruins,
Pour soutenir le processus
infrastructure is
politique,
devastated.
nous
In
devons
order to
continuer à
support the
travailler à
political
garantir
process, we
l'accès
must
au travail
continue to
humanitaire,
work to
à
guarantee
accompagner le redressement
humanitarian
du pays
access, to
et à
assist the
faciliter
rebuilding
le
of the
retour
country,
sûr,
and
digne
facilitate the
et
safe,
volontaire
dignified, and
des
voluntary
réfugiés
return of
syriens
Syrian
et des
refugees
déplacés
and
internes.
internally
L'Union
displaced.
européenne est
The
engagée dans
European
ce
Union
sens.
is committed
Elle a
in this
suspendu
regard.
certaines mesures
We have
restrictives
suspended
dans
certain
des secteurs
restrictive measures
économiques
in
clés comme
the
l'énergie et les
economy, such
transports,
as in
pour
energy and
faciliter les
transport, in order
transactions
to
financières et
facilitate
bancaires pour la
financial
reconstruction.
and bank
Le
transactions
17
for the
mars,
reconstruction.
la conférence de
The
Bruxelles a
17th of
permis
March,
de
the
mobiliser
Brussels Conference
5,8
mobilized
milliards d'euros pour la
5.8 billion
Syrie
euro
et
for
les pays
Syria
voisins,
and
dont 2,5
neighboring
milliards
countries,
venant de l'Union
2.5
européenne
billion,
pour
billion
2025
of which
et 2026.
is from the European
Pour
Union
faire
for
converger
25 and
aide
26.
humanitaire,
It is
passage
this
progressif à une logique de
coordination that will
relèvement
make it
et
possible to
accompagnement de la
converge
transition
around the common
politique,
goal
ces
of
efforts doivent
Syria's
être appuyés par la
stabilization
poursuite de la coordination au
and
sein du
the
système
much
des
needed
Nations Unies.
activation of
Enfin, Monsieur le
humanitarian
Président,
aid.
paix
Finally,
dans la région.
Mr. President, peace in the
Dans un
region.
environnement régional
In
instable, la
an
Syrie doit devenir un
unstable
pôle de paix
regional
et de
environment,
sécurité.
it's very
Cela passe par
important
la
that there
reprise
be
du dialogue avec le
stability.
Liban autour de leurs
This
frontières
includes
communes.
resumption of
Cela
dialogue
passe
with
par
Lebanon on
l'arrêt
the common
des
border
activités
and
militaires dans le
also
Golan. Nous
cessation
appelons
of
instamment Israël
activities in
à
the
cesser les
Golan. We call
bombardements,
upon
à
Israel
se
to stop
retirer de la zone
bombing
de
the
séparation
area,
prévue par le accord de
withdraw from the
dégagement
area
de
of
1974,
separation of the
à respecter
1974
la
agreement
souveraineté et
and respect the
l'intégrité
sovereignty and
territoriale de la
territorial
Syrie.
integrity of
La Syrie
Syria.
et Israël
Syria
doivent
and
tenir
Israel
compte
must take
de leurs
into account
préoccupations
the
de
security
sécurité
concerns of the other.
La France, Monsieur le
France,
Président,
Mr.
poursuivra son
President, for
soutien aux
its
efforts
part,
pour le
will
redressement de la
continue
Syrie,
our support to
pour la
efforts to
liberté
rebuild
pour tous les
Syria, for
Syriens,
the freedom
pour
for
la
all
stabilité
Syrians, and
régionale
for regional
et pour la lutte
stability,
contre le terrorisme.
and for the fight
Je
against
vous remercie.
terrorism. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for this statement, and I will give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
I thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the members of the A3+, namely Guyana, Sierra Leone, Somalia, and my own country, Algeria. The A3+ would like to thank Special Envoy Geert Pedersen and USG Tom Fletcher for their valuable briefings. We have also listened carefully to Mrs. Jumana Saif. Mr. President, at the outset, the A3+ reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the unity, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria. Syria that confronts confronts today grave security, humanitarian, political, and economic challenges. These fundamental principles cannot be sustained in the absence of civil peace among Syria's diverse community and the cessation of external interference in the country's internal affairs. We reiterate our strong condemnation of the summary killings carried out recently in Syria's coastal provinces. It is imperative to emphasize that civilians, regardless of their background, must be protected under all circumstances in line with international humanitarian law. The A3+ also reiterates its call for accountability and look forward to the report of the committee established by the interim authorities to investigate thoroughly the attacks and identify those responsible. Further compounding the security challenges are the ongoing IDF airstrikes against military sites in Syria's territory. Also are the alarming statements by Israeli officials about, I quote, the indefinite presence of their forces in Syrian territory and their intention to establish a demilitarized area in southern Syria, all of which violate Syria's territorial integrity and sovereignty. The A3+ condemns such irresponsible statements and actions which will only exacerbate regional instability. We stress that the Golan Heights is an occupied Syrian territory and reaffirmed by the Security Council Resolution 497. And we call for full respect for the 1974 disengagement agreement, including its provision regarding the area of separation. Mr. President, the challenges confronting Syria requires the full support and solidarity of the international community. The A3+ stresses the importance of building a Syria that is inclusive of all its citizens, free from any form of discrimination, and that embraces the aspirations of all Syrians. We believe that the establishment of a committee to promote civil peace and reconciliation, to promote and facilitate communication between communities is essential to achieving lasting peace in Syria. In this regard, mechanisms for truth-seeking, transitional justice, and community-based reconciliation, anchored in Syrian ownership, should be encouraged. The A3+ acknowledge the constitutional declaration made on March 13 and emphasize the need for an inclusive transition process in Syria. In this regard, the A3+ takes note of the agreement signed on March 10 by the leadership of the interim authorities and the SDF, and call for all actors to support a nationwide ceasefire. Differences should be resolved through dialogue, through negotiation, and the guns must be silenced to allow humanitarian access, to protect civilians, and to enable early recovery effort. The A3+ reiterate its support to the Special Envoy efforts to assist the interim Syrian Authority to organizing Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process, facilitated by the United Nations and based on the key principle outlined in Resolution 2254. Mr. President, the humanitarian situation in Syria remains catastrophic, and substantial efforts are required to improve it. All fields have been severely impacted by the crisis. To address these challenges, the Syrian people need the continued support and solidarity of the international community, including sustaining and unimpeding humanitarian access. The A3+ acknowledge the burden of prolonged displacement and underlines the need to prioritize social integration program for returnees, to also prioritize access to basic public services to ensure durable solution. The A3+ takes note of the pledges and commitments made during the Brussels conference on 17 March and hope that they will soon be fulfilled and the humanitarian response plan will be fully funded. With one of the most severe displaced crises in the world, displaced Syrians, both inside and outside the country, must be guaranteed safe, dignified, and voluntary return to their homes. While we note that more than 1.2 million IDPs and refugees have returned home since November 2024, obstacles to return remains. If we are sincere in our commitment in supporting Syria's transition, we must provide Syrians with the means to rebuild their country. Without rapid economic recovery, it will be difficult to envision a safe and prosperous future for Syria. In this regard, Guyana, Sierra Leone, Somalia, and Algeria firmly believes that the swift lifting of unilateral sanction is essential. Mr. President, the situation in Syria remains volatile, and the international community stands at the crossroads between the hope for a brighter future and the fear of further descent into chaos in Syria. Let us do everything we can to help all Syrian, build the country they have long aspired. The Security Council must act with unity, with resolve, with humanity to support the Syria transition process and prevent a relapse into violence. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for the statement and now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And like others, I'd like to start by thanking Special Envoy Pedersen and Under Secretary General Fletcher for your briefings. I'd also like to thank Ms. Seif for your briefing and for your tireless advocacy efforts. We echo your calls for an inclusive political transition that prioritizes the participation and leadership of women in Syria. President, I'd like to make 3 points today. First, this month, Syrians marked the 14th anniversary of the start of the uprising against the Assad regime. At last, they can see the prospect of a more stable and hopeful future. But horrific events this month demonstrate too that this remains a fragile and critical moment in Syria. We welcome the interim authorities' announcement establishing a fact-finding committee to investigate and prosecute individuals who committed crimes during the clashes in Syria's coastal areas. A peaceful and secure country is in the interests of all Syrians and the wider region. Diplomacy and dialogue are the best way of achieving this, and we urge all parties to refrain from further violence and to exercise restraint at this critical moment. We are concerned by Defense Minister Katz's declaration that the Israeli presence in the area of separation and the Golan Heights could be for an unlimited period. This is unacceptable, and Israel must present clear and reasonable timelines for their withdrawal in line with international law. Second, we note the progress made in Syria's political transition. We welcome the constitutional declaration's provisions on freedom of expression, religion, and women's rights, alongside the commitment to establish a Transitional Justice Commission. We call for swift implementation of these actions and hope the declaration will provide a solid foundation for a transition that guarantees the rights of all Syrians. A clear approach on accountability and transitional justice is essential for national reconciliation and to prevent a recurrence of the violence that we saw this month. Progress on this cannot wait. As the interim authorities take these next steps, we call for a consultative and inclusive process and for appointments to the transitional government to reflect Syria's rich diversity. Finally, we recognize the immense challenges of rebuilding Syria and that this cannot be done without economic recovery and the international community's coordinated support. The UK is committed to Syria's recovery, underlined by our pledge at last week's Brussels conference of up to $207 million in critical humanitarian assistance. This will alleviate some of the suffering in Syria, as well as helping Syrians in Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, who generously host so many refugees. In parallel, the UK has relaxed some sanctions on Syria and revoked the asset freezes of 24 entities and institutions in the energy, transport, and finance sectors. We have also issued a general license to support transactions for humanitarian activities in Syria. In conclusion, President, the UK stands with the Syrian people in building a more stable, free, and prosperous future. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I welcome Foreign Minister Rasmussen presiding over today's meeting. I thank Special Envoy Patterson and USG Fletcher for their briefings. I also listened carefully to the statement by civil society representative Ms. Safe. China has been closely following the situation in Syria. We sincerely hope that with the help of the international community, Syria will steadily advance its political transition and restore peace and stability at an early date. In this connection, I wish to make the following points. First, an inclusive transition process should be advanced. In coastal areas of Syria, civilians were indiscriminately killed, the inhumanity and brutality of which is outrageous. The Syrian interim authorities have announced the launch of a one-month independent investigation to ensure accountability. We are following the progress in this regard. We hope that the Syrian interim authorities will carry out their relevant work in a transparent and responsible manner, which is crucial to the international community's assessment of the credibility of the political transition in the country. China takes note of the recent initiatives by the Syrian interim authorities to advance the political transition. It is our hope that they will earnestly deliver on their commitments. And guided by the principles of Security Council Resolution 2254, engage in broad dialogue and consultation with all sectors in Syria to achieve genuine inclusiveness. The work of Special Envoy Patterson should be respected and supported by all parties. The Office of the Special Envoy needs to strengthen its team on the ground. The League of Arab States can play a greater role in the Syrian political process. Second, the bottom line of countering terrorism should be preserved. Following the change in the situation in Syria, foreign terrorist fighters in Idlib have moved across Syria, posing an immediate threat to the Syrian people and to regional and international peace and security. FTFs have been involved in the mistreatment and the killings of civilians in the coastal areas. This is yet another reminder of the need to remain highly vigilant against the terrorist forces in Syria. The Security Council adopted a presidential statement this month, reaffirming its unified position against the foreign terrorist fighters. We urge the Syrian interim authorities to fulfill their counterterrorism obligations and to take decisive measures to combat all Security Council-listed terrorist organizations, including the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, also known as Turkestan Islamic Party. Third, active efforts need to be made to develop and improve people's well-being. With Syria's economy in a long-term stagnation, improving living conditions is the most pressing aspiration of over 20 million people. The Syrian interim authorities should take promoting economic development and improving people's livelihood as top priority. We call on traditional donors to increase their humanitarian assistance to Syria. Relevant countries should take measures to eliminate the negative impact of unilateral sanctions and ensure that the relevant measures play a positive role in alleviating the humanitarian situation and promoting sustainable development. In conclusion, I wish to reiterate that the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria should be respected. Golan is internationally recognized as occupied Syrian territory. The 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement should be complied with. China condemns Israeli airstrikes against Syria. Israel should withdraw from Syrian territory without delay. Thank you, President.
Thank you. I thank the representative of China for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pakistan commends Denmark's excellent stewardship of the Council during this month. We thank Special Envoy Geir Pedersen and USG Tom Fletcher for their briefings. We appreciate and support their work and that of their teams. We have also listened carefully to Madame Juman Saif, especially her remarks about Syria moving forward in the best interest of the Syrian people, which are most pertinent. Madam President, it is right for this Council to follow closely the situation in Syria, a cradle of civilization, historic land of beautiful people. This brotherly country has unfortunately endured instability and immense suffering in recent years, compounded by internal strife and external interventions. The recent developments offer a crucial opportunity for peace, reconciliation, and reconstruction. We remain hopeful that Syria's new leadership will guide the nation towards an inclusive, stable, and prosperous future. If at all there was a right time for the international community to engage and assist with this objective, it is now. The challenges confronting Syria, political, economic, security, and humanitarian, demand a holistic and coordinated response. A Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process based on the principles contained in Resolution 2254 and facilitated by the United Nations remains the key to sustainable peace. We welcome Syria's new interim constitution as a critical step towards restoring the rule of law. The National Dialogue Conference held last month is also a positive step. We expect that the forthcoming appointment of an interim government, Legislative Council, and Constitutional Committee would reflect Syria's diversity and foster inclusive and representative governance. We recognize the regional and international efforts such as the meetings in Aqaba, Riyadh, Amman, Paris, and Brussels that underscore global commitment to Syria's peaceful transition and reintegration into the international community. Madam President, Syria's economic distress, marked by cash shortages, energy deficits, and rising prices, exacerbates its humanitarian crisis. Economic revitalization is vital to long-term stability. UN's Transitional Action Plan, aimed at poverty reduction, refugee integration, and institutional strengthening, requires robust international support. In this regard, lifting of unilateral sanctions is imperative to facilitating reconstruction and aid efforts, while remaining vigilant against entities with known affiliation to terrorist organizations, a reassessment and drawdown of the UN sanctions regime is also warranted to ensure that essential economic and humanitarian initiatives are not hindered. The resurgence of violence, shocking violence, as has been reported, particularly along Syria's western coast, is deeply concerning. Sectarian strife threatens to undermine peaceful political transition besides exacerbating the humanitarian challenges. We urge an immediate and permanent end to all violence, protection of civilians in line with international law, and a credible, independent investigation into the recent incidents. Era of impunity must be in the past, as noted by the Special Envoy. In this regard, we welcome the establishment of an independent committee by the Syrian interim authorities and look forward to its findings. Israel's repeated and continuing incursions and airstrikes into Syrian territory, continued violations of the 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement, and its declared intent for an indefinite presence and full demilitarization of southern Syria are unacceptable, constitute blatant violation of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and undermine international law and regional stability. We echo the Special Envoy's condemnation of these illegal actions and Israeli military escalations in Syria, and reaffirm this Council's 14th March presidential statement, which upholds Syria's sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, and specifically calls on all states to respect these principles and to refrain from any action or interference that may further destabilize Syria. Israel must cease its incursions forthwith, and this Council must hold Israel to its obligations, and as also emphasized by the Special Envoy. Madam President, the agreement between Syria's interim government and the Syrian Democratic Forces to integrate all civil and military institutions marks a significant step towards national unity. Meanwhile, the persistent terrorist threat, particularly from Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates and the foreign terrorist fighters, remains a grave concern. The 1267 Sanctions Committee and its monitoring team must continue vigilant assessment to prevent any resurgence of terrorism. The humanitarian crisis in Syria remains dire, with over 16.5 million people in urgent need of assistance. More than 90% of Syrians live in poverty, and over half the population is food insecure. The international community must intensify its efforts to address these urgent needs while also supporting Syria's long-term recovery. Madam President, a durable peace in Syria hinges on a credible political transition, national unity and reconciliation, and inclusive governance. The international community must remain steadfast with necessary political and economic support. Pakistan stands firmly with the resilient people of Syria in the pursuit of peace and stability. I thank you.
And I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Thank you, Madam President. Panama thanks you for convening this informative meeting on the political and humanitarian situation in Syria, and we very much appreciate the reports delivered by Mr. Geir Pedersen, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, as well as by Mr. Tom Fletcher, Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, OCHA. And we are also grateful and took note of the briefing delivered by Madam Jumana Saif, representing civil society. We'd also like to welcome the distinguished delegations of Syria, Iran, Qatar, Jordan, and Turkey at this meeting. Madam President, on the 1st of March, after 14 years of civil war, Syria announced the formation of a new government, an interim government, and according to the statements made by the Syrian authorities, they have the aim of reflecting the diversity of the Syrian people. This new government has a historic opportunity to progress towards an inclusive political process that guarantees the participation of all citizens who make up the Syrian state, including women, promoting the stability and reconciliation of the country. Seizing upon this opportunity requires the greatest efforts to be made by the interim authorities in order for the constitutional process to be implemented, ending with the approval of an inclusive constitution that is appropriate in due form, that can create a balance between the institutions of the state and provide credibility and respect, earn credibility and respect on the part of everyone. Also, efforts must be made to put an end to to bring to an end the interim government situation by carrying out inclusive elections that will lead to an elected government according to the norms of this new constitution. But unfortunately, just a few days after the establishment of the new government on the 6th of March, what we saw was an escalation of violence in the coastal provinces of Latakia and Tartus that led to the deaths of 1,300 civilians, approximately, the majority of them belonging to the Alawite community, but also belonging to other minorities. This serious episode represents a clear threat to the political and social stability of the country. Panama robustly condemns these acts of violence, and we ask that the investigations announced by the Syrian government with regard to these terrible events be held rapidly, transparently, and that it be independent and impartial in accordance with international standards. These investigations should guarantee accountability and bring to justice those responsible for these crimes in order to restore trust in the peace process. Madam President, in an encouraging development, on the 10th of March, the Syrian authorities achieved an agreement with the Syrian Democratic Forces, including with the Kurdish community. This agreement establishes a ceasefire and the integration of the Kurdish forces into the Syrian army. This is a crucial step for the internal cohesion of the country. It also guarantees the recognition of the constitutional rights of the Kurds, which will make it possible for them to fully participate in the political life of Syria. This progress is a positive signal of the Syrian authorities with regard to the unification of the country and strengthening future efforts towards a common and peaceful future for all communities. It's also essential that the authorities firmly address the threat represented by foreign terrorist fighters operating in Syria, including the remnants of Islamic State, ISIS, and others. Despite these threats that are destabilizing the country and the region and which require a robust and coordinated response, given the presence of irregular groups that has led to clashes on the border between Lebanon and Syria on the 18th of March. It was possible, however, to achieve a ceasefire agreement between both countries. This agreement reflects the urgent need for closer cooperation in order to avoid new escalations of violence. Madam President, the humanitarian crisis in Syria continues to worsen, affecting more than 16.5 million people who require urgently humanitarian assistance. The conflict continues to prolong the suffering, with thousands of people displaced and seeking safety, and the number of internally displaced has increased to more than 7 million. According to OCHA, more than 2 million people in the northeast of Syria are living in improvised camps with limited access to basic services. Also, only 40% of the health centers in Syria are fully operational, and 70% of the population depends on humanitarian assistance to survive. This situation requires a firm commitment on the part of the international community in order to guarantee safe and unhindered access for humanitarian assistance throughout Syria. In addition to the humanitarian crisis, the presence of chemical weapons and unexploded munitions continues to endanger the population, making it difficult to see a return of those displaced. Panama renews its request for a resumption of dialogue between Syria and the OPCW, but we insist on the need to insist on the need for verifiable elimination of chemical weapons. The international community must guarantee this commitment and leading to regional disarmament. It's also timely to explore measures that could facilitate the economic recovery of Syria, including the creation of conditions which will allow for the promotion of commercial activities, the reconstruction of infrastructure, and the re-establishment of basic services. In this regard, it's fundamental to consider the possibility of a timely lifting of sanctions which are still affecting the Syrian economy in order to provide an environment that is conducive to economic development and investment. These initiatives should proceed in parallel to the commitments of the new Syrian government to guarantee security and respect for the rights of the entire population. Madam President, Panama reiterates its support for the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria. We believe it is crucial that these principles be respected because they are fundamental for the people and government of Syria being able to move forward towards a credible political process that will guarantee the participation and protection of all the rights of all its citizens. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam President. I wish to thank Special Envoy Pedersen and the USG Fletcher for their briefings. I also welcome the contribution of Ms. Saif. Madam President, the aspirations and rights of Syrian people to live in peace, freedom, and prosperity in Syria have not changed since peaceful protests 14 years ago. On the contrary, we can see the resolve to fulfill these aspirations and the pursuit of justice and peace are as strong as ever. We remain mindful about the sensitive situation in the country, and we continue to express hope. The Brussels conference, where donors pledged nearly $6.5 billion in aid to support Syria, clearly shows the will and readiness of the international community to help the recovery and reconstruction, with the EU and its member states pledging almost 3.4 billion euros. Moreover, the EU will consider further lifting of sanctions depending on the developments on the ground. This, however, remains a cautious hope, for many wounds from the past remain. There is a fear of revenge, impunity, and the return of violence. The continued instability is a clear indicator of the frail transition. The interim authorities face the important responsibility to protect its population and to ensure that every Syrian lives in safety, with dignity and without fear, their human rights being fully protected and respected. People of Syria, regardless of gender, religion, or ethnicity, are the ones that should shape the country's future. In this regard, we reiterate the importance of a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political transition, facilitated and assisted by the United Nations and based on principles of the Resolution 2254. The UN Special Envoy has our full support in this regard. Madam President, on Syrian future, let me make the following remarks. First, the future of Syria depends on inclusiveness. It is crucial that Syria's peaceful political transition is genuinely inclusive. We take note of the recent national dialogue and urge the interim authorities to build on and beyond it. Concrete actions must follow. Only a transition that promotes an open dialogue among all Syrians can restore much-needed trust. Women, youth, and civil society have a crucial role to play in this regard. We hope that the recently issued constitutional declaration brings Syria further in restoring the rule of law and promoting a genuinely inclusive political transition. Second, the future of Syria depends on reconciliation and justice delivered. They are the cornerstone of a credible political transition. Laying early ground for a much-needed transitional justice is imperative. Accountability and justice for victims are essential for a stable and peaceful Syria. All individuals responsible for crimes committed, regardless of their affiliation, must be held accountable. We call on the interim authorities to fully cooperate with the United Nations, including the International Commission of Inquiry and the International, Impartial, and Independent Mechanism in this regard. The events in the beginning of March, when hundreds of people were killed in the Syrian coastal region, clearly show the fragility of the moment. We strongly condemn the killings and intimidations of civilians and call on all sides to prevent any possible reoccurrence and to protect civilians. Third, the future of Syria depends on its unity and respect for its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence. In this regard, the agreement on unification of the SDF-controlled territories in northeast Syria with the rest of the country is a step in the right direction, as it bodes well for an inclusive and representative Syria. We call on all parties, internal and external, to refrain from any activity that could further inflame tensions, escalate conflict, exacerbate the suffering of affected communities, destabilize Syria, and jeopardize a credible and inclusive political transition. It is imperative that the new Syria does not leave any room for extremism and terrorism. We stress the obligation to respect Syrian independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, and we once again call for the full respect of the 1974 disengagement agreement. Fourth, the future of Syria should be resilient. First steps are the protection of civilians, critical civilian infrastructure, and safe and unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid. Urgent challenges like food insecurity, water scarcity, fuel shortages, landmine contamination, displacement, and critical shortages in healthcare require immediate attention. Once the most immediate needs are met or in parallel, the authorities must work on economic prosperity and opportunity, on rebuilding the health and education system, and provide security. International community stands ready to help. This, together with respect of human rights, the rule of law, and democracy, will be the best foundations for a successful and resilient Syria. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Madam President, and let me thank Special Envoy Pedersen, USG Tom Fletcher, and Mr. Saif, Civil Society Briefer, for the insightful presentations. Madam President, as we're discussing the latest developments in Syria, I would like to briefly make the following points. Greece stands in solidarity with the Syrian people and supports Syria's recovery, which can only be assured through a truly inclusive political transition. The recent atrocities, condemned strongly by this Council presidential statement of 14 March, have increased the urgency for an inclusive political transition without foreign interference, while securing the protection of all ethnic and religious communities, including Christians, Alawites, Druze, and Kurds, in the spirit of national unity and the key principles of Security Council Resolution 2254. Safeguarding Syria's rich cultural heritage and religious monuments is also key, as it's demonstrating a clear dedication to international law, including the international law of the sea. The appalling violence in Syria's coastal region has also increased the urgency for full accountability and transitional justice. The credibility of the interim authorities rests on holding the perpetrators of these attacks accountable. We expect the independent committee to work well and fast to this end. Enhancing accountability and establishing transitional justice is critical. As consistently advocated by the Syrian civil society organizations across the board, the only viable future for Syria is the one where accountability, concord, dialogue, and peace prevail. In this light, Syria must allow the Independent International Commission of Inquiry to investigate all violations. All Syrian communities should be able to live in Syria without fear. We are closely monitoring developments, including the recent agreements between the SDF and Damascus, as well as the announcement of a constitutional declaration, expecting that they will feed into a viable and inclusive political transition. In this context, we took careful note of the reluctance, especially the one expressed by the Kurdish element vis-à-vis the constitutional declaration. A declaration that contains several points raising concern, such as the lack of separation of power, or the law of one religion being the primary source of jurisprudence in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious country. Implementation of the actual level of inclusivity in the new structures will be key, as is the appointment of the new inclusive interim government that was proclaimed by the interim president. Madam President, as part of the EU family, Greece has been stressing that the easing of sanctions ensure that expectations are met in terms of an inclusive transition, accountability of recent atrocities, as well as full respect of international law. Recognizing the severe humanitarian situation on the ground and standing in full solidarity with the Syrian people, Greece made its pledge during the 9th Brussels Conference in support of Syria's recovery. Overall, the EU has pledged nearly 2.5 billion euros in support of the country's recovery for 2025 and 2026. Madam President, the creation of conditions for safe and voluntary returns of Syrian refugees must remain among our primary goals. Syrians deserve to go home and contribute to the rebuilding of the country. We fully support the efforts of UNHCR and OCHA in this regard, as well as collective efforts towards restoring shelters and critical infrastructure in Syria, contributing to the safe and voluntary return of Syrian refugees. Greece reiterates its unwavering support for Syria's unity, sovereignty and territorial integrity and condemns all systematic violations of Syrian sovereignty. Lastly, we welcome the recent visit by the Interim Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Al-Shabani, to the OPCW and the commitment to work for the elimination of the remaining chemical weapons in the country. Madam President, in closing, let me stress that there is a path towards a prosperous, stable and inclusive Syria. To get there, we believe this Council message must be clear. International legitimacy and recognition lie at the end of a fully inclusive political path with strong and inclusive state institutions and with respect to international law, including international law of the sea. These are critical elements for assuring regional stability and promoting Syria's long-term security and prosperity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة. أرحب بداية بوجود السيد وزير خارجية الدنمارك.
I welcome the participation of His Excellency the Minister for Foreign Affairs here in New York and his attendance of a part of the meeting. I thank Denmark for its support for Syria and the Syrian people. I thank you, Madam President, and I thank your team for managing the work of the Security Council this month.
أود أيضا أن أتوجه بالشكر للسيد جير
I
بيترسون
extend my thanks to the Special Envoy, Mr. Pedersen,
وكيل الأمين العام
and Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Tom Fletcher, and Mrs. Joanna Saif for their briefings today.
السيد الرئيس
Madam President,
تواصل سوريا المضي قدما
Syria
في هذه
is moving
المرحلة
forward
المفصلية من
at this
تاريخها
pivotal stage
فبعد
in
عقد
its
مؤتمر
history,
الحوار الوطني
following the National
وبناء على
Dialogue
مخرجاته
Conference and based on its
وبهدف
outcome,
إعداد الإطار القانوني
and with
الناظم
the aim of
للمرحلة
preparing the legal
الانتقالية
framework for the
شكلت
transitional
رئاسة
phase,
الجمهورية
the
لجنة
Presidency of the
لصياغة مسودة
Republic
الإعلان
formed a
الدستوري
committee to draft the
الذي تم
constitutional
اعتماده
declaration,
لاحقا من
which
قبل
was
السيد رئيس
subsequently
الجمهورية
approved by the President of the
يؤكد
Republic.
الإعلان الدستوري
The
التزام الدولة
constitutional
السورية
declaration
بالحفاظ على
affirms
وحدة
the Syrian
أراضيها
state's commitment to
وتحقيق
preserving
الاستقرار
the unity
المجتمعي
of Syrian territory,
وصون السلم الأهلي
achieving societal stability
ويجرم
and
دعوات
safeguarding
التقسيم
civil peace.
والانفصال
It criminalizes
وطلب التدخل
calls for
الأجنبي
division
أو
and secession,
الاستقواء
the request
بالخارج
for foreign intervention and
كما
reliance
يضمن
on
حرية
external
المعتقد
powers. It
والتنوع
guarantees
الثقافي
freedom of belief
للمجتمع
and
السوري
the cultural
بجميع
diversity
مكوناته
of Syrian society in
ويشدد
all
على
its
منع الفتنة
components. It
ومنع
emphasizes
التحريض على
the
العنف
prevention of sedition and
ومكافحة جميع
incitement to
أنواع
violence
وأشكال
and
التطرف
calls
العنيف
for combating all forms and types of violent extremism.
ينص الإعلان الدستوري أيضا على أن جميع الحقوق والحريات المنصوص عليها في المعاهدات والمواثيق والاتفاقيات الدولية لحقوق الإنسان التي صادقت عليها سوريا تعد جزءا لا يتجزأ منه، وتصون الدولة بموجبه حق المشاركة السياسية وتشكيل الأحزاب على أسس وطنية، كما يشير لحفظ الدولة لمكانة المرأة وصون كرامتها ودورها في الأسرة والمجتمع وكفالة حقها في التعليم والعمل. لقد أرسى الإعلان الدستوري نظام الحكم في المرحلة الانتقالية التي حددها ب5 سنوات، وتضمن الأحكام الناظمة لعمل السلطات التشريعية والتنفيذية والقضائية. وأكد الإعلان على التعاون مع المجتمع الدولي والمنظمات الدولية في إعادة الأعمار وتيسير عودة اللاجئين والمهجرين وتحقيق المصالح الوطنية. وإحقاقا للعدالة، نص الإعلان الدستوري على إحداث هيئة لتحقيق العدالة الانتقالية تهدف لإنصاف الضحايا والناجين وتكريم الشهداء. وأود في ضوء وجود السيدة كارلا كينتانا رئيسة المؤسسة المستقلة المعنية بالمفقودين معنا في هذه القاعة أن أرحب بها وأن أشيد بجهودها ونشدد على أهمية البحث عن الأشخاص المفقودين وتحقيق تقدم في هذا الملف الإنساني الهام بل والبالغ الأهمية لوضع حد لمعاناة الأهالي وتمكينهم من التعبير وأتطلع لاجتماعنا سوية وزملائي بعد السيدة الرئيس، في الوقت الذي يتطلع فيه الشعب السوري لبناء مستقبل يرتكز على العدالة والحرية والكرامة ووقف نزيف الدم، وقعت أحداث الساحل السوري المأساوية حيث شنت مجموعات مسلحة يقودها عناصر من أجهزة أمنية تابعة للنظام السابق هجمات غادرة ومدانة على الأمن العام وإدارات البلديات ومراكز صحية، وتبعتها انتهاكات وإعدامات ميدانية وأعمال تخريب ونهب على يد بعض المجموعات المتطوعة غير المنضبطة. لقد نقلنا لمجلس الأمن ولمعالي الأمين العام مضمون الورقة ذات الصلة التي عممتها وزارة الخارجية والمغتربين والتي صدرت بالوثيقة S/2025/152. لقد أدانت الحكومة السورية تلك الجرائم الشنيعة وشكلت رئاسة الجمهورية لجنة وطنية مستقلة للتحقيق في الانتهاكات التي تعرض لها المدنيون والمؤسسات العامة ورجال الأمن والجيش وتحديد المسؤولين عنها، على أن ترفع اللجنة تقريرها إلى رئاسة الجمهورية في مدة أقصاها 30 يوما. وأكدت القيادة السورية أن سوريا الجديدة ستكون دولة قانون وأن القانون سيطبق على الجميع، وشددت على أن الاعتداء على حرمة الناس وعلى دمائهم وأموالهم خط أحمر، ولن تذهب دماء الأبرياء دون محاسبة أيا كان مرتكب هذه الانتهاكات. واستنادا للمصلحة الوطنية العليا والتزاما بتحقيق السلم الأهلي بين مكونات الشعب السوري، شكلت رئاسة الجمهورية لجنة عليا للحفاظ على السلم الأهلي والعمل على تعزيز الوحدة الوطنية في هذه المرحلة الحساسة. من جهة أخرى، وفي سياق الجهود المبذولة لتوطيد الاستقرار، تم توقيع اتفاق يقضي باندماج قوات سوريا الديمقراطية ضمن مؤسسات الجمهورية العربية السورية والتأكيد على وحدة الأراضي السورية ورفض التقسيم. أكد الاتفاق أيضا على ضمان حقوق جميع السوريين في التمثيل والمشاركة في العملية السياسية وكافة مؤسسات الدولة بناء على الكفاءة وبغض النظر عن
regardless
خلفياتهم
of
الدينية
their
والعرقية،
ethnic or religious
وعلى
background.
أن المجتمع الكردي
It
مجتمع
recognizes
أصيل
the
في الدولة
Kurdish
السورية
community as an integral
التي
part of
تضمن
the
حقه
Syrian
في
state,
المواطنة
which guarantees
وكافة
its
حقوقه
right to
الدستورية.
citizenship and all constitutional rights.
كما أشار الاتفاق
The agreement
لدمج كافة
also
المؤسسات
provides for the
المدنية
integration of
والعسكرية في
all
شمال
civil
شرق
and
سوريا
military
ضمن
institutions
إدارة
in
الدولة
northeastern
السورية
Syria into
بما
the
فيها المعابر
administration of the
الحدودية
Syrian state,
والمطار
including
وحقول
border
النفط
crossings,
والغاز.
the airport,
وقد
and
شرعت
oil and
اللجان
gas fields.
التنفيذية في
The
تطبيق
executive
الاتفاق
and
ضمن
implementation
المهلة
committees
المحددة
have begun
لنهاية
implementing
العام
the
الجاري.
agreement within the timeline set for the end
السيد
of this year.
الرئيس،
Madam President,
تؤكد الحكومة
the Syrian
السورية
government
التزامها بتعزيز الشراكة مع الأمم
reiterates its
المتحدة
commitment to enhancing its
ووكالاتها
partnership
المتخصصة.
with the UN and its
فالسوريون
specialized
ينتظرون
agency.
بفارغ
The
الصبر
Syrian people
تحسن الأوضاع
eagerly await
الإنسانية
the
والمعيشية
improvement of humanitarian
وانطلاق
and living
مسيرة التعافي
conditions, the
الاقتصادي
launch of economic
وإعادة
recovery
الأعمار
and
والعودة
reconstruction,
إلى
and the
مسار
return to a
تحقيق
path
أهداف
of
التنمية
sustainable
المستدامة.
development.
في هذا الإطار
In this
جددت
context,
الحكومة السورية
the Syrian government
الإذن الممنوح
has
للأمم
renewed the
المتحدة
authorization granted to the
ووكالاتها
UN and its
المتخصصة
specialized agencies
لاستخدام معبري
to
باب
use
السلامة والراعي
باب السلامة and
لستة أشهر
الراعي border
إضافية
crossings for an
تنقضي
additional
في
6
أيلول
months
سبتمبر
expiring
القادم.
on 3 September 2025.
وشاركت سوريا للمرة الأولى
For the first time,
ممثلة بالسيد وزير
represented by the
الخارجية
Minister of
والمغتربين
Foreign Affairs
في
and
مؤتمر بروكسل
expatriates.
التاسع.
Syria participated in the
إننا نتوجه ببالغ
Brussels
الشكر
conference.
والتقدير
We express
للدول
deep gratitude
والجهات
and
التي تعهدت
appreciation to the
بدعم
countries
الشعب
and
السوري
entities that
خلال
pledged
هذا
support
المؤتمر.
for the Syrian people during this
ونتطلع
conference.
للوفاء بما
We look
تم الإعلان
forward
عنه
to the
من
fulfillment
تعهدات
of these pledges
لتحقيق أثر
to
ملموس
achieve tangible
يشعر به
impact
السوريون
that
في
will be
أقرب وقت
felt by the
ممكن.
Syrians as soon as possible.
تعرب سوريا عن تقديرها البالغ
Syria expresses
لدولة
its
قطر
deep appreciation
وللمملكة
to the
الأردنية
state of
الهاشمية
Qatar and the
الشقيقتين
Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan,
ولبرنامج
to
الأمم
these two
المتحدة
brotherly
الإنمائي
states and to the
على مبادرة
UNDP
تزويد
for
سوريا
the
بالغاز
initiative of
عبر
supplying
الأردن
Syria with gas through
لتوفير
Jordan
400
to
ميجاوات من
generate
الكهرباء.
400 megawatts of electricity.
ونناشد الدول الأخرى
Syria calls
لاتخاذ
on other
مقاربات
countries to
مماثلة
adopt similar
لإنهاء معاناة
approaches
السوريين
to
في
help
أقرب وقت
alleviate
ممكن.
the suffering of the Syrian people as soon as possible.
وتشدد بلادي
My
على
country
ضرورة الانتقال من
underscores the
المساعدات
need
الإنسانية
to move
المؤقتة
from temporary
إلى وضع أسس
humanitarian aid
لحلول
to laying the
شاملة
foundations
ومستدامة
for comprehensive
عبر
and
إجراءات
sustainable
حقيقية
solutions through
وملموسة
real and tangible
تبدأ
measures.
بالرفع الكامل
This
للعقوبات
starts with the
المفروضة
full lifting
على
of
الشعب السوري
sanctions imposed on the Syrian
لفك قيد
people
الحصار
to break
عن
the
رقاب وأيدي
shackles of the
السوريين
blockade and
ليتمكنوا من
allow
إعادة
Syrians
بناء
to
وطنهم
rebuild their
والسير
homeland
به نحو
and
غد أفضل.
advance towards a better future.
إننا نقدر عاليا
We
الخطوات التي
appreciate
اتخذتها بعض
the
الدول
measures taken by some
لرفع
countries
بعض
in order
العقوبات
to lift some of the sanctions
ونتطلع
imposed.
لرفعها
We
بشكل
look
كامل
forward to the
ومستدام.
full and sustainable lifting of sanctions.
السيد الرئيس،
Madam President,
يواصل جيش الاحتلال
the
الإسرائيلي
Israeli
اعتداءاته
occupation army
الآثمة على
continues
سيادة
its
سوريا ووحدة
outrageous
وسلامة
violations of
أراضيها
Syria's
في انتهاك للقانون
sovereignty and
الدولي
territorial
وميثاق
integrity
الأمم
in
المتحدة
violation of
وقراراتها ذات
international law,
الصلة
the Charter of the
واتفاق
UN,
فض الاشتباك
relevant
لعام
resolutions, and the
1974.
1974 disengagement of forces
وفي
agreement.
الوقت الذي لا تزال فيه قوات الاحتلال الإسرائيلي
Israeli
تسيطر
occupation
بالقوة
forces continue
وبشكل لا شرعي
their unlawful
على
control
مساحات
by
واسعة من
force
الأراضي
over
السورية
vast swathes
في
of
الجولان
Syrian
السوري المحتل
territory in the occupied
ومنطقة
Syrian
فصل
Golan,
القوات
the area of
ومحافظة
separation,
القنيطرة
Quneitra
وجبل الشيخ
Governorate, Mount Hermon,
والمناطق المجاورة
and
في
neighboring
محافظتي
areas
درعا
in the
وريف دمشق.
governorates of Daraa and
فقد
rural
شهدت الفترة
Damascus.
الماضية
Meanwhile,
اعتداءات
recent weeks
إسرائيلية
have
متكررة
witnessed repeated
على
Israeli
عدد من
attacks
المناطق
on
السورية
various Syrian
أدت لاستشهاد
regions,
عدد من
resulting in
المدنيين
the
السوريين.
martyrdom of several Syrian civilians.
لقد طالت آخر هذه
The
الاعتداءات اليوم
latest such attack
مناطق في
took place
محافظة
today,
درعا
targeting areas in the
حيث
governorate
تعرضت
of Daraa,
قرية كوية
Kuwaya,
خلال
the village
الساعات
of
الماضية
Kuwaya in the last
لقصف
hours
مدفعي وجوي
was
عنيف
subject to
استهدف
violent
الأحياء السكنية
artillery
والمزارع
and air shelling,
ما أسفر عن
targeting
استشهاد 6
agricultural
مدنيين
farms. As a result,
مع
6
احتمال ارتفاع
civilians
العدد
were killed
نتيجة
and martyred, and
الإصابات
the death
الخطيرة
toll is likely
واستمرار
to
العدوان.
rise because because of the severe injuries and the ongoing aggression.
إن سوريا تؤكد على مضمون رسالة الشكوى
Syria reaffirms
التي
the
وجهتها إلى
complaint
السيدة رئيسة
addressed to the
مجلس الأمن
President of the
ومعالي
Security
الأمين العام
Council and the Secretary
والصادرة
General,
بالوثيقة
circulated as document S/2025/120,
وتدين بأشد
Syria
العبارات العدوان
strongly
الإسرائيلي
condemns
السافر على
the
أراضيها
blatant Israeli aggression against
والتصريحات
its
الصادرة عن
territory.
مسؤولي كيان
Syria
الاحتلال
denounces statements by
والمطالبة بما
occupation
أسمته
officials
نزع
calling
سلاح
for what
الدولة
they term
السورية
the
من
disarmament
محافظات
of the
الجنوب
Syrian
السوري
state in the southern governorates
وترويج سلطات
and
الاحتلال
their false
لادعاءات
claims
كاذبة بالحرص على
about
مكونات
protecting
بعينها من النسيج
specific
الوطني السوري
components of the Syrian
وزعم
national
حمايته
fabric.
إن تلك الممارسات العدوانية
These aggressive practices
والتصريحات
and
الاستفزازية
provocative
تؤكد
statements
سعي كيان
reveal
الاحتلال
the
الإسرائيلي
Israeli
لزعزعة أمن
occupation's
واستقرار
intent
سوريا.
to destabilize
لذا
Syria's security
تجدد
and
بلاد
stability.
سوريا
Therefore,
مطالبتها مجلس
my
الأمن
country, Syria,
بتحمل
calls
مسؤولياته
again on the Security Council
واتخاذ
to shoulder
الإجراءات
its
الحازمة
responsibility
والفورية
and take firm
لإلزام
and
إسرائيل
immediate
بالوقف
action
الفوري
to
لعدوانها
compel
المستمر
Israel to
على الأراضي
immediately
السورية
cease its ongoing
والانسحاب
aggression against
الفوري
Syrian
وغير
territory
المشروط
and
من
to
جميع
withdraw
الأراضي
immediately
السورية
and unconditionally
كما
from
تدعو
all
بلاد
Syrian
سوريا
land. My
الدول
country,
ذات
Syria,
النفوذ
also
للقيام
calls
بدور
on all
فاعل
countries with
وبناء
influence
في
to
هذا
play
المجال.
an active and constructive role in this
ختاما
regard.
السيد الرئيس
In conclusion, Madam
إن
President,
سوريا الجديدة
the new
تواجه
Syria
استحقاقات كبيرة
grapples with major
وتحديات
deadlines and
جسيمة
immense challenges.
وهي تتطلع
It looks
لدعمكم في
forward
هذه
to
المرحلة
your
الحساسة
support at this
لصنع
critical
مستقبل
juncture
أفضل
to build
لجميع
a better
السوريين
future for all
وبأيدي
Syrians,
جميع
by all
السوريين
Syrians,
رجالا
women,
ونساء
men,
شبابا
and
وفتيات
the youth.
مستقبل
A future
يبنى على قيم
anchored in
المواطنة
the values of
وسيادة
citizenship,
القانون
rule of law,
والنهوض بالمجتمع
and advancement of
وطي صفحة
society.
الاستخفاف بالحياة
Disregard for
والكرامة
life and
الإنسانية
human dignity must
وهو ما
come to
يستوجب
an end.
التصدي
This
للأجندات الخارجية
requires
الهدامة
confronting destructive foreign
ولمحاولات بث
agendas
الفتن
and attempts
ونشر
to sow
خطابات
discord,
الكراهية
spread hate
وللتحريض
speech,
على
and
العنف
incite
والإرهاب.
to violence and
شكرا
terrorism.
سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Madam President.
Shukran. I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, and I now give the floor to the Islamic representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, thank you, Madam President. We appreciate Mr. Peterson, the Special Envoy, and Mr. Tom Fletcher, the Under-Secretary General, for their insightful briefing. We have closely listened to the views of Ms. Jumana Saif. With regard to the current situation in Syria, I wish to make the following points. First, we strongly condemn the widespread violence of people in Latakia and Tartus since 6 March, which has led to a mass killing of civilians. The interim authorities must take decisive action to end all violence, protect civilians, and ensure unhindered humanitarian access. All communities' rights must be respected and guaranteed, and any attempts to displace minorities, especially Alawites and Shiites, must stop immediately. We welcome the Security Council presidential statement of 14 March, which strongly condemns this carnage and call for a swift, credible, transparent, independent, and comprehensive investigation. The interim authorities must ensure full accountability and swiftly bring the perpetrators to justice. Second, we stress the need to combat terrorism in Syria and grave threat posed by foreign terrorist fighters, which endanger regional and global security. This transnational threat demands coordinated action. We echo the Security Council call for the interim authorities to take decisive measures and uphold its counter-terrorism obligations. FTS must be repatriated, held accountable, and prevented from further destabilizing the region. Iran remains committed to fighting terrorism and stands ready to cooperate with legitimate international partners to address these challenges. Third, we express deep concerns over Israeli ongoing violation of Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity. Recent Israeli airstrikes, including those on the city of Daraa, have resulted in civilian casualties and heightened regional tensions. Such aggression constitute blatant violation of international law and exacerbate instability in the region. Furthermore, Israel's continued occupation of the Golan Heights remains a significant obstacle to peace and security. Resolution 497 unequivocally declares Israeli imposition of its law in the occupied Golan Heights as null and void and without international legal effect. We call upon the Security Council to take decisive action to halt these violations and to compel Israel to withdraw from all occupied Syrian territories in compliance with international law and relevant UN resolutions. Fourth, Syria faces severe humanitarian and economic challenges requiring urgent reconstruction and restoration of essential services. However, US and EU sanctions continue to obstruct recovery, disproportionately harming vulnerable population. We welcome the recent EU decision to suspend sanctions against Syria in transport, energy, and banking sector. This relief is insufficient. All illegal measures must be fully lifted to facilitate Syrians' reconstruction and ensure the safe return of refugees. Fifth, the future of Syria must be determined only by its people, free from any external interference or imposition. Iran supports the establishment of an inclusive government through free election and comprehensive national dialogue, ensuring fair representation for all Syrian communities. To ensure national solidarity, the temporary constitution should also be submitted to a public vote. The constitution must serve to strengthen national unity rather than sow division or exacerbate ethnic and religious tensions. Iran emphasized the necessity of a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process, facilitated by the United Nations and grounded in the principles of the UN Security Council Resolution 2254. This resolution outlines a clear roadmap for establishing an inclusive, non-sectarian government through free and fair elections and comprehensive national dialogue, ensuring fair representation for all Syrians. Iran supports the efforts of the UN Special Envoy and stressed that the United Nations must play a central role in this process. Sixth, we welcome Syrian returns to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation after a 13-year suspension. This development allows Syria to resume its role as a significant member of this esteemed body. Iran remains committed to supporting Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity and is dedicated to playing a constructive role in achieving lasting peace and stability in Syria and broader region. In conclusion, we categorically reject the baseless accusation made by the U.S. representative, which are once again intended to distort reality and mislead the international community. For years, under the false pretext of counterterrorism, the United States has flagrantly violated Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity, enabling terrorist groups and backing Israel occupation to advance its geopolitical agenda. We must not overlook the fact that the severe humanitarian crisis and economic hardship in Syria stem directly from Washington's unlawful sanctions and its systematic violation of international and fundamental human rights of the Syrian people. These are undeniable facts, and the representative of the United States cannot erase these through deception, misleading, or by leveling baseless accusation against Iran. We seek and support the establishment of sustainable stability and security in Syria and are not involved in any action that would destabilize Syria and broader region. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Jordan.
السيدة الرئيسة، أشكركم على انعقاد هذه الجلسة، ويطيب لي أن ألقي هذا البيان نيابة عن المجموعة العربية. كما أشكر المبعوث الأممي الخاص إلى سوريا السيد جير بيدرسون ووكيل الأمين العام للشؤون الإنسانية السيد توم فليتشر على إحاطتيهما كما أشكر السيدة جمانة سيف على
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you. I thank Mr. Geir Pedersen and Mr. Tom Fletcher for their briefings. Madam President, Syria is going through a critical historic moment that requires an active international political will to guarantee stability and peace in this brotherly country. For decades, the Syrian people have suffered and they deserve today the opportunity to live in freedom, security, dignity and equality. The Arab group reaffirms that the security and stability of Syria are cornerstone for stability and security in the region. We reiterate the importance of standing with the brotherly people of Syria in the reconstruction and rebuilding of an Arab unified, independent, stable and safe state for all its citizens, where there is no place for terrorism or extremism, no violation of its sovereignty or territorial integrity by any party, and a state that fulfills the rights and respects the rights of all its citizens. The Arab group reaffirms its unwavering position in supporting the Syrian people and their efforts in rebuilding their homeland based on the principles that preserve the security, sovereignty and independence of Syria, guarantee the right of its people and fulfill their humanitarian and developmental needs. We reiterate that international support to Syria is not a moral imperative, but also an investment in the stability of Syria and the future of the region and all its peoples. In this regard, the Arab group reiterates and underlines the importance of intensifying international efforts aiming at supporting the Syrian people in rebuilding their country through a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned process that engages all components of the Syrian people to guarantee the unity, stability and safety of Syria and guarantees the rights of all its citizens. We welcome the outcomes of the Syrian National Dialogue Conference, particularly its reaffirmation of the preservation of the unity, sovereignty of Syria over all its territories and its rejection of all forms of partition or abandoning any part of its lands. We reiterate that this conference is a step on a path that needs to be completed for a comprehensive, inclusive political process owned and led by Syrian people that includes all components of the Syrian people for a better future in line with the principles of Security Council Resolution 2254.
كما تؤكد المجموعة على ضرورة إسناد سوريا في جهود إعادة الإعمار وحشد الدعم الدولي لزيادة حجم المساعدات المستهدفة لمشاريع التعافي المبكر وتعزيز قدراتها في إعادة إعمار الدولة وتجاوز كل المعوقات التي تعتري جهود إعادة البناء. كما نشدد تزامنا مع تقديم الإطار الانتقالي ما بعد سقوط النظام السابق وتنفيذ الإصلاحات ذات الصلة على ضرورة رفع العقوبات الاقتصادية عن سوريا في أسرع وقت والتي تعيق مصالح الشعب السوري وتعافي الاقتصاد السوري والمرحلة الانتقالية السياسية كجزء من الجهود الدولية المبذولة من أجل دعم السلام والازدهار في سوريا. السيدة الرئيسة، إن حل قضية اللاجئين السوريين يكمن في عودتهم الطوعية والكريمة والمستدامة إلى وطنهم، إلا أن ذلك يتطلب توفير الظروف الآمنة والملائمة لهذه العودة وتهيئة الظروف الأمنية والحياتية والسياسية اللازمة.
Security and living conditions, political conditions needed for this return. We reiterate that early recovery projects, particularly in the sectors of housing, education, health and energy, are vital steps to create the conditions conducive for the return of the Syrian refugees in a voluntary, safe and sustainable
ونشدد في هذا الإطار على أن الدول
regard,
المستضيفة للاجئين السوريين لا يمكنها تحمل عبء الاستضافة بمفردها
bear the burden of hosting these refugees alone. As such, the international community is required to provide financial and technical support to ensure that the hosting countries are capable of continuing their humanitarian role that they are performing on behalf of the international community until such time when refugees are able to return to Syria.
لابد لنا أن نشير إلى
We need
مركزية
to point
احترام
out
وحدة
to the
سوريا
centrality of the
وسلامتها
need to
الإقليمية
respect the
وسيادتها
unity,
وأن نؤكد
territorial
بأن أي
integrity and
انتهاك
sovereignty of Syria. We
بهذه
reiterate that
السيادة
any violation of this
بما في
sovereignty,
ذلك الاحتلال
including by
الإسرائيلي
the
لأجزاء من
Israeli
الأراضي السورية
occupation of parts of the
يمثل
Syrian
تهديدا
territories,
للاستقرار الإقليمي
represent a threat to
وندين
regional
بهذا
stability.
السياق
We condemn
الاحتلال
in this regard
الإسرائيلي
the Israeli
ومحاولات
occupation
التدخل
and
في الشأن
its
السوري
attempts to interfere
والتوغلات
in the domestic
والغارات
affairs of Syria
الإسرائيلية
and the
المتكررة
incursions and the
على الأراضي
repeated
السورية
airstrikes, Israeli
بما في
airstrikes
ذلك
against the
توغل
Syrian
القوات
territories,
الإسرائيلية
including Israeli
وقصفها
forces
لبلدية
incursion
كويا
and their
غربية مدينة
shelling of the
درعا
Koya village
درعا
west
في
of
سوريا
the city
اليوم
of Dar'a today.
والذي
This has led
أسفر عن
to
ارتقاء
the
واستشهاد
killing
وإصابة عدد من
and the injury of
الأشخاص
several
وهو ما
people.
يشكل
This
انتهاكا جسيما
constitutes a
للقانون
blatant violation
الدولي
of the international
والتي
law,
تزيد من حدة التوتر
thus
في المنطقة
exacerbating and
وتصعيدا
heightening tensions in the
سيدفع
region,
باتجاه المزيد
and
من الصراع
escalation would lead to further conflict.
وندعو مجلس الأمن
We call
والمجتمع
upon the
الدولي
Security Council
إلى
and the
تحمل
international
مسؤولياته
community
القانونية
to shoulder
والأخلاقية
the legal
وإلزام
and
إسرائيل
moral
بوقف
responsibilities,
اعتداءاتها
compel Israel to stop
واستفزازها
its
المقصود
aggressions and
واحترام
deliberate
سيادة سوريا
provocations, as well as
كما
compel Israel to
نشدد على
respect the sovereignty
الالتزام
of Syria.
باتفاق فك
We reiterate
الاشتباك
the need to
للعام
comply with the
1974
1974
واحترام القانون
disengagement
الدولي
agreement, the
والانسحاب
respect of the
الفوري
international
من
law,
الأراضي
and the
السورية
immediate
المحتلة
withdrawal from the occupied
كما
Syrian
ندعو إلى
territories.
تعزيز
We
التعاون
call
الدولي
for
والإقليمي
enhancing
في
regional
مكافحة
and
الإرهاب
international
بجميع أشكاله
cooperation
بما
in
في ذلك
fighting
تنظيم
all forms
داعش
of terrorism,
وغيره من
including
الجماعات
ISIS
والعناصر
and
الإرهابية
other
ونؤكد على
terrorist
أهمية
groups and
التعاون
elements. We
في
reiterate the
مكافحة
importance of
تهريب المخدرات
collaboration in fighting
والسلاح
drug,
والجريمة
weapon
المنظمة
trafficking,
العابرة
as well
للحدود
as
والتي تمثل
transnational
تهديدا
organized
إضافيا
crime that
لأمن سوريا
represent an
والمنطقة
additional
برمتها
threat to the security of
ختاما
Syria and the region as a
السيدة
whole. In
الرئيسة
conclusion, Madam
تؤكد
President,
المجموعة
the
العربية على
Arab
أن
group
الحكومة
reiterates
السورية
that the
الجديدة
new Syrian
تتحمل
government
مسؤوليات جسام
is shouldering
ترتبط
tremendous
بمعالجة
responsibilities
تبعات المرحلة
related to
السابقة
addressing the repercussions of the
وتلبية طموح
previous
السوريين
regime and the
وتطلعاتهم في
fulfillment of
وطن
the
آمن
aspirations of Syrians
فضلا
in
عن
a
إعادة
safe
الإعمار
country. In addition
ودورنا
to the
بأن
reconstruction
نساند
process,
سوريا
our role is to
وشعبها
support
في
Syria
تحقيق
and its
السلام
people in
والاستقرار
achieving peace,
والازدهار
stability,
بعد
and
سنوات
prosperity
من القتل
following years
والتشريد
of killing,
والخراب
displacement,
والدمار.
destruction.
شكرا
Thank
السيد
you,
الرئيس.
Madam President.
I thank the representative of Jordan for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Qatar.
شكرا السيدة الرئيسة. بداية نهنئكم على ترأس مجلس الأمن لهذا الشهر.
Congratulate you on presiding over the Security Council this month, and we welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs presiding over the meeting today. We thank Mr. Geir Pedersen, the Special Envoy, and the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mr. Tom Fletcher, and Ms. Seth for their briefings, and we align ourselves with the statement delivered on behalf of the Arab Group. Madam President, last year, the brethren Syrian people turned a very painful page that lasted for years. Today, they are trying to rebuild a safe and stable country, a country that plays a regional and international role. The state of Qatar has a principled position, and it has been firm. We support our Syrian brothers and sisters during this critical phase of their history. Upon the guidance of His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the Emir of the State of Qatar, we continue to support the brethren Syrian people at the humanitarian and relief levels. We contributed to the recovery and reconstruction efforts and to the provision of basic services. We recently supplied Syria with natural gas via Jordan, in cooperation between the Qatar Development Fund, Jordan's Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, and the UNDP to generate 400 megawatts of electricity daily as a first step to address the severe shortage in electricity, thereby improving basic services. This in addition to hundreds of tons of humanitarian assistance we are sending by air.
This also includes political and diplomatic support. On December 28 last year, an agreement was reached to protect the interests of the Syrian Arab Republic through the permanent delegation of the State of Qatar at the OPCW. This contributed to the promotion of dialogue between Syria and the international community during the transition and to promote collaboration and cooperation between the Syrian government and UN and international agencies. We welcome the holding of the Syrian National Dialogue Conference. It is an important step towards consensus, unity, and building a state of law and institutions. We welcome the Constitutional Declaration and hope it becomes a strong basis for the transition, especially as it focuses on the separation of powers, the establishment of a committee to draft a permanent constitution, achieve transitional justice, and protect the rights and freedoms of all Syrians while committing to the unity of the people and the land. We stress that the security and stability in Syria requires state monopoly over arms through one national army that reflects all Syrian components, paving the way towards a peaceful transition through an inclusive, peaceful process. We strongly condemn the crimes perpetrated by outlaw groups and their targeting of security forces. We welcome the agreement to integrate the Syrian Democratic Forces into state institutions. This is an important step to strengthen civil peace and stability in the country. We also condemn Israeli attacks on Syria because they violate Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is a blatant violation to international law, including the latest attacks on Daraa and the bombing of a number of areas in Syria and the ongoing land grab in the buffer zone. The international community must take urgent action to compel Israel to comply with the international law and resolutions of international legitimacy and stop its repeated attacks. We took part in the donor conference on Syria held last week in Brussels. There is an urgent need to increase humanitarian assistance and ensure their unimpeded delivery to all affected areas, to lift economic sanctions imposed on the former regime because their raison d'etre is no longer there, but their negative impact continues on the Syrian people. We welcome the positive steps taken recently to ease sanctions. In conclusion, Madam President, we reaffirm our firm position in support of Syria's sovereignty, unity, independence, and territorial integrity. We stress our support to all international and regional efforts to ensure security and stability in Syria and achieve its people's aspirations. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Qatar for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Madam President. I would also like to thank Mr. Pedersen, Mr. Fletcher, and Ms. Jumana Saif for their briefings. Madam President, the new era in Syria presents a historic opportunity for both the country and the people in the region. At this critical moment, the international community must step up and extend its support to help the Syrian people overcome the challenges they face. Turkey, as always, will continue to spare no effort in providing all necessary assistance to ensure a stable, united, and secure Syria and a good neighbor. We emphasize the importance of inclusive and representative governance in our engagements with the Syrian administration. Since the fall of the regime, the administration has demonstrated common sense and due diligence. Turkey welcomes the convening of the National Dialogue Conference and announcement of the Constitutional Declaration. We believe that these efforts will pave the way for an inclusive Syrian-led, Syrian-owned transition process as we hoped for a long time. However, in Latakia and surrounding areas, we have unfortunately witnessed attempts and provocations aimed at undermining the smooth transition process. The wave of violence began with organized and simultaneous attacks orchestrated by remnants of the former regime. These attacks should not be mischaracterized as a sectarian conflict between Damascus and the Alawite community. International community must recognize that these were coordinated efforts supported by certain actors to destabilize Syria. It is essential to remain vigilant against such attempts that could trigger a new cycle of violence engulfing the entire country, something that must be prevented and aborted at all costs. All perpetrators must be held accountable. International community should support the Syrian administration's efforts to investigate these recent violent incidents. Madam President, political transition process is multifaceted, encompassing everything from the establishment of new institutions to ensuring transitional justice. Leadership and ownership of Syrians with UN guidance based on the administration's consent will be crucial to the success of this process. Madam President, there is no place for Daesh, PKK, YPG, SDF in Syria's future. Eradication of these terrorist groups is essential for achieving a peaceful, independent, and politically unified Syria as soon as possible. All terrorist elements must leave the country. PKK, YPG, SDF must immediately disarm, dissolve, and come fully under the control of a national army with a single command structure. We approach the agreement reached between the Syrian administration and the SDF with cautious optimism. However, the proposed implementation timeline is overly prolonged and must be expedited. Ensuring a swift and full implementation of this agreement is essential to guarantee a unified and centralized administration in Syria. The immediate transfer of security over detention centers and camps in the northeast of the country to the Syrian administration is imperative. Turkey is ready to cooperate with Syria in this regard. We remain fully committed to the fight against terrorism. Turkey, Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria convened in Amman on March 9th to discuss regional security and counterterrorism efforts, working toward a regional mechanism to combat Daesh and enhance existing efforts. Madam President, Israeli attacks continue to violate Syria's sovereignty and pose a threat to the future of the region as a whole. International community, especially this Council, must speak out against Israel's increasing aggression towards Syria. We strongly condemn Israel's continued military escalations and urge this Council to make immediate and decisive action before it becomes too late. Madam President, Syria needs full support of us, all international community, to ensure a meaningful and lasting impact on the future of its people. Our collective efforts are essential in providing humanitarian and reconstruction aid to Syria. Reconstruction of critical infrastructure and economic recovery remain urgent priorities. Without restoring normalcy, return of displaced Syrians to their homeland may not be possible. International community must prioritize securing funding for humanitarian activities, as this remains a significant challenge. We once again call for lifting all sanctions to help Syria overcome its ongoing security and economic challenges. Syrian people deserve relief from suffering so they can rebuild their lives with dignity, hope, and peace. Turkey stands ready to support all sincere efforts that benefit the Syrian population and especially to jointly work with UN agencies. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkey for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite Council members to informal consultations to continue our discussion on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.
Ray Hesed.
Good to see you again.
Syria, how concerned are you?
Listen, it's what happened, of course, on the coast is not only extremely alarming, it's disturbing, unacceptable. Then we are also, as you know, seeing foreign interference. We are seeing Israeli bombardments. They have occupied new land, which is also contributing to the instability. And they're also saying that they don't want the Syrian caretaker authorities to go into the south. Then, of course, we have the situation in the northeast. No, there is a contact. There is an agreement in principle to deal with that between the authorities in the northeast and the caretaker authorities. That is positive and very important. So what we need to see is that the investigation that is now ongoing on the coast, that we will hear a proper result from that the continued dialogue between the caretaker authorities in Damascus and the northeast, that continues, and that it is supported by Turkey and the United States, and then we need to see a stop in Israeli attacks. I think if all of this happens, and then we have a transitional process that is really inclusive, I think it's possible to avoid it. But as I said in my briefing, Syria stands at a crossroad. It could go bad, but that should be in no one's interest. And no one can really have an interest in that. So what we need to make sure is that we support what Syria is now trying to do, and that we mobilize real international support behind that, both political and economical.
Thank you, Efraim. Thank you so much. You have mentioned also in your speech, Mr. Pedersen, that you have shared with the transitional authority the best international practices to guide in the constitution formation, the government formation. What are your what are your biggest worries over this matter, and how receptive do you think, or do you feel that they are being to international practices?
Listen, we have a good dialogue with the caretaker authority on these issues, and of course, no, it is a constitutional declaration that will be for an interim period. But at the same time, as you know, they also want now to start to work on a new constitution. So there will be a constitutional committee that will be appointed. Extremely important that that committee is representative of all Syrians, all communities are part of it, and that the new social contract that will then be developed will learn from the process they have now and what I call best international practices. And obviously, will not be surprised to hear, we are here to help and to assist in that process.
Yes, Mr. Pedersen, you mentioned the foreign fighter issue in your statement. We saw multiple member states, they actually also mentioned that. According to your communication to the current caretaker government, what is their response to this issue?
I think the caretaker authority obviously noticed that there was a unanimous statement from the Security Council last week, which also addressed this issue. So this is obviously something I will continue to discuss with the caretaker authorities, and hopefully with the formation of now a new transitional government that we are expecting to take place soon, it will be possible to move that forward in a proper manner. But this is not only linked to this is also linked to what I would call the issue of, the future of the Syrian army and the importance of having a DDR and security sector reform being discussed in a proper manner, as I also mentioned in my briefing.
But basically, the caretaker government, they agree that the foreign fighters, they will be, let's say, phased out in the future.
No, I think you have to ask them about that. I didn't say that.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
You too.